Hello, and when we first started hanging out together this morning, we were just friends, but things changed, and I've fallen in love with you. I just know that if you gave me a chance, I could make you feel so good. So I'm coming not as your buddy, and not as a co-counselor, but for the first time, as a man who loves a woman and who wants to hold her and provide for her and yes, have sex with her. But no, seriously, Katie, I love the way you laugh and I love the way your hair smells and I love that sometimes for no reason you're late for school and I don't care that you're bow-legged and I don't care that you're bilingual. All I know is I would have said no to every single person on your list because I've always wanted you. Welcome to Best of the Rest. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my cool slacker co-host, Andrew Williams. Andrew, how you doing today, man?
I have a job. I do things. I'm fine, Chris. I saw Hot Fuzz on the big screen yesterday. That was,
I was ready for you to talk about Alien Romulus. I had no idea you had a Hot Fuzz. All right.
Yeah, it was Alamo did and it's funny because they're doing Shaun of the Dead later in the month because Shaun of the Dead is now on its 20th anniversary, which, that caused a disc in my back to slip. But I also did see Alien Romulus. I saw that on Thursday.
I've heard good things. Yes, thumbs up, approval for you?
Yeah. If you know where that if you predict the end of that movie, I will be shocked.
Interesting.
That's all I'm gonna say.
Okay. I know
so
you're not.
I'm not saying anything else, but yeah.
I know you're not much of a ranking guy, but do you have a rough place where this fits in the franchise? I mean, is it third behind the first two entries?
I think that's going to be where it lands for lots of people. That it lands right there. We've spoken before how I'm an apologist for Prometheus and more specifically Alien Covenant. I think Alien Covenant is great. I would struggle to put this. I would maybe put this on par with Alien Covenant for me, but that's coming from somebody who genuinely thinks Alien Covenant is great and super underrated.
Got it.
So I would say though that it's clearly steps above. Alien 3, I realize everybody has complicated feelings about because I think Alien 3 kind of gets judged by a lot of people off of what it was supposed to be. So there's kind of a pass given for some of the weirdness, but I really don't dislike any Alien movie, I think, except Alien Resurrection, hashtag PP. That's the tough one for me, just because I think there's a lot of really weird concepts there, which I think this movie actually does some interesting things with, as far as some of the base ideas there. So, it takes a lot of things from a lot of places, and I think puts them together really, really well. You get some allusions to me. There's one Easter egg that I definitely think is a little forced, but it doesn't really hurt the movie at all. You'll know exactly what it is when you see it. But otherwise, I really did like Alien Romulus.
Is she wearing Ripley's tennis shoes, Andrew? Is that?
They are wearing Reebok shoes, but that's not it.
Okay.
That's not it.
She doesn't pull the tongue up and it's got Ripley written in a Sharpie on the tongue.
No. Nothing like that. Nothing like that. There is more connective threads than I expected there to be.
Okay,
but nothing. There is one obvious. Actually, let me rephrase. There is another thing that there's two things.
Okay, anyway, I think we got it. I think we. Yeah, I want to stay away from spoilers.
There's actually 6 things. There's actually, when I think about it, it's a whole movie. Anyway.
Yeah, I gotta sneak away to see that. Friend of the show, my wife, zero interest in seeing it. So, gotta get out of the house and check that out in theaters, hopefully. But Hot Fuzz, that's very cool. What is your favorite of the Cornetto trilogy, Andrew?
Hot Fuzz.
Same, 100%.
Yeah.
And I, at one point, thought maybe it's because I saw that one first. I happened to see Hot Fuzz on DVD before I ever saw Shaun of the Dead. And I was like, well, is it my favorite just because it was my introduction to kind of this style or whatever? But, now that we're 20 years later, I've seen them all several times. Actually, I've only seen At World's End once, I will admit. And it was easily not my favorite, but I'm sure I need to revisit it. But regardless, yeah, Hot Fuzz is my favorite. It's just the most fun. I have nothing bad to say about Shaun of the Dead, but Hot Fuzz does hit a little bit harder for me. I don't know if this is a hot take or not, Andrew. I'm not sure this is a popular answer. I know Shaun of the Dead has its fans for sure. So
Shaun of the Dead is first one, and I think for a lot of people, it's kind of because it comes out in like 2004. I think that is 2004 because this is a 20-year anniversary. So I think a lot of people have a fondness for Shaun of the Dead. What Shaun of the Dead is very good. Don't misunderstand me. Like I'm not trying to say that like it's the bad one that gets overrated, but I think what happens with Shaun of the Dead is it's a lot of people's introduction to Edgar Wright. It's a lot of people's introduction to Simon Pegg. It's a lot of people's introduction to like zombie movies like that and Dawn of the Dead. The Dawn of the Dead remake in 2004, I think, end up being like fairly formative, like kind of side, like Shaun of the Dead, especially like a side entry into like the horror genre. And so I think there's a lot of formative things that can happen to it that get attached to it that I think makes it people's favorite. And obviously, like I said, it is very good. But Hot Fuzz for me, I like a lot more. I think it's got a tighter narrative. I like Simon Pegg playing kind of the straight character instead of kind of the man-child. Which, so the funny thing is, we saw Hot Fuzz yesterday. We're seeing Shaun of the Dead at AMC later in the month, but no World's End. So we actually, after watching Hot Fuzz, we all went back to one of my friend's apartments and watched The World's End, to also kind of, fit that one in too. And in that one, hashtag PP, Simon Pegg's character is like never likable.
And that was a big thing for me.
I think that's part of the problem.
And I think, clearly they wanted to like do something different with Simon Pegg every time, right? So a new shade, but yeah, his I think I'm agreeing with you there, but I gotta watch it. Was this your first time rewatching it in a while?
I've checked out. I go back a few times, and I actually do like it a decent amount. There's one line in that movie that kills me every time. It's towards the beginning where they're in the car, and he's just like he calls them the Five Musketeers, and they start having this conversation about how many Musketeers there were. And Martin Freeman, I think, is the one that's like, Three Musketeers is a fiction, right? Written by Alexander Dumas. And Simon Pegg turns around and goes, a lot of people are saying that about the Bible these days. And I think it's Paddy Considine that's like, what? That it was written by Alexander Dumas. And the way he says it is just so unbelievably funny to me. And it makes me laugh every time. And I love, Paddy Considine also plays one of the Andys in Hot Fuzz. He's the one with the mustache. They both have mustaches, but he's the older one. But I just love those characters. And he's a great actor. He was also in House of the Dragon recently. But, yeah, Hot Fuzz is my favorite. World's End was better than I remembered it rewatching it. I do enjoy watching it, but it's definitely this kind of the weird one because Simon Pegg is like, because in Shaun of the Dead he's kind of a man-child, but like he has to step up and
he's got an arc
in the zombie apocalypse. He's got an arc, but in World's End, he's got this trauma that he doesn't really address the whole movie, but like he's never really likable, never really grows very much. And everybody hates him. Like, his relationship with Nick Frost in that movie is, like, in the first one, they're obviously friends. In the second one, they develop a friendship. And in this one, they kind of hate each other. And so taking kind of the foundation of the movies, which is the Simon Pegg, Nick Frost relationship, and making Simon Pegg so deeply unlikable, but then making their relationship essentially adversarial the entire movie, makes it feel very different. It makes it feel like a very different experience. And so I think that's why it kind of ends up in this weird kind of, oh yeah, they also did that one. But I do think it's very funny. I think it's the one that gives a lot of the other characters the most time to shine. Like guys like Paddy Considine or Eddie Marzan or Martin Freeman or Rosamund Pike's in there too. If you can not associate her forever with her character from Gone Girl and actually see her as a normal person. But it's pretty fun. I enjoyed watching it back. So now we get to do Shaun of the Dead later in the month, which I am also excited about. But with a bullet, Hot Fuzz is 100% my favorite of all of them. Just on a base level, I guess for me, it's obviously there's this weird central mystery of what's happening in this town. So you've got a town, weird people are dying, you don't know why. That's always going to strike my sensibilities. And you throw in Edgar Wright, Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, baby, you got a stew going.
There's speaking lines in these movies that get stuck in your head. Live there rent free, as they say. Yep. In Hot Fuzz, there's a line that me and my brother will quote all the time. It's the line reading that stands out. But so when he's at the police station and it's someone's birthday and they keep offering him cake and he keeps politely declining, oh, no thanks. And then he goes off on this big tangent, and it's just like a close up of Simon Pegg's face, and then from off screen, a hand comes on frame with a plate with a cake, and he goes, "No thanks." How firmly he says it without looking over, then the hand just retreats.
Yep.
It's fantastic.
I
My brother did that all the time.
Movie.
We know exactly what we're recording. Good stuff, Andrew.
Yeah.
We're not talking about Hot Fuzz today or Edgar Wright, but we are talking about a comedy, Andrew. And spoiler alert, a comedy I enjoy very much because every week we take a second look at a movie that was poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's summer camp month, and this week we are talking the 2001 film Wet Hot American Summer. Andrew, I'm so ready for this. What is your history with this movie? Did you see it before preparing for the podcast this week? Is it one you revisit often? What do we got?
I not familiar at all. No. But
as usual.
I've seen it before. I did not see it like when it came out. Like this comes out and we'll talk about the release year because of course I've forgotten it.
I mean, like no one saw it when it came out, like in 2001.
Yeah, this was 2001. So like I was 14. So like Wet Hot American Summer is not really on my radar. But I kind of heard about it when I was in college. People would talk about it. They'll be like, oh yeah, Wet Hot American Summer. Like it kind of got that cult status. And I really didn't even then get into it. It was really only when I saw that Netflix was going to like make the show the first day of camp. And I heard about that and I was like, oh, is this where we are as a people? Okay. So I was like, I better watch this. So this was genuinely like, that would have been like 2015. I think that show was coming out. So this was a good 10 plus years after it came out. I finally watched it and then checked out the show once it came out too. So a much more recent history than a lot of other people have with this movie. But yeah, still excited to talk about it.
Man, I am so excited we get to talk about this. I feel truly spoiled. It's rare that we get to talk about one of my favorite films on this podcast. But when it comes to favorite comedies, I mean, just last week, we got to talk about MacGruber. Here we are 4 weeks later. I'm talking about legitimately another top 5 comedy for me. I love this film. I didn't see it in 2001. I mean, like I said, no one saw it in 2001. It's probably 07, 08, shortly after high school for me. It's building that cult following, it's building that reputation. Yeah, I hear about this movie that, you know, as we'll get to, like everyone in this movie goes on to greater fame. And everyone talks about this movie that they all did together. And I got a DVD of it, watched it, loved it. And it was a movie that I would introduce to like all of my friends. Like we would hang out. I'm like, dude, you got to see this. You got to see this. And one thing I'm definitely going to talk about as we discuss this movie is the way it's slowly descends into absurdity and madness and surrealist humor. There's like a progression to it. So it was just a joy to watch it with someone who's never seen it before and watch them like laugh at the standard jokes. And then at some point they're like, what?
Wait, what?
Like, yeah, it's that the pacing of it, I think, is just perfect. And like I said, we'll talk about it. So I've seen it many, many, many times. You speak of that, the sequel series they did, First Day of Camp. We'll talk more about it later because the whole concept of that, I think, is hilarious. I did, of course, watch that when it came out. They did do one more series. They did the 10 Years Later, which I, for whatever reason, have not watched. I've said on this podcast before that I don't have Netflix. Well, I have signed up again, and that damn thing is $25 a month. So I've got to get my money's worth. I will be checking out 10 Years Later, finally checking it out. But I can't wait to get into it. It's going to be Mark Strong Award, best scene. It's going to be tough. I'm still rolling around a few in my head. But before we get there, Andrew, let's set the stage a little bit with this film. It is released July 27th of 2001. That's when it debuts in theaters, technically, but an extremely limited release, select cities, not a wide release. It was made on a budget of $1.8 million. It's about as indie as you can get. At the box office, technically, its receipts are only $295,000. $295,000, $206,000 to be exact. I think it might have been literally 3 cities. Critically, however, it's not well received. at the time of its release, holds a 38% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. And there's even going to be some, retrospective reviews on there at this point, but that score just is certified rotten. Audience score much higher. It does have the cult following. It is a fan favorite, but critics, especially at the time, were not feeling this movie.
No, definitely not. Like you said, it's a pretty negative reception overall. With a much higher audience score. It's another instance of something like a Heavyweights, where there is this kind of 38% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, but it's a 75% audience score, which honestly still a bit lower than I maybe expected, but still obviously the fan support was there, the viewer support was there, but critics, like you said, we're not feeling it.
Taking a look at the creative team, the movie is written by David Wain and Michael Showalter, who their careers are intertwined. They are creative partners. This movie is directed by David Wain. So taking a look at this duo, they get their start with the comedy troupe The State, which eventually gets its own sketch-style comedy show on MTV. I will say, I don't remember this. I don't think I ever watched it or saw an episode. But I am familiar with the comedy group Stella, which spawns off of this. That's Michael Showalter, David Wain, and Michael Ian Black, who's in this movie we'll talk about later. I definitely remember seeing some of their specials on Comedy Central. They had their own show I saw a couple episodes of. But that's still all very early on. This is really their first major project. Looking at the movies of David Wain, I really like his work. After this, he makes a movie called The 10, which I have not seen. It seems it's like an anthology type movie, so it seems like it might be a little sketch comedy-ish. 10 short stories based on the 10 Commandments. It's got an incredible cast, just like this movie does, but it's very hard to get a hold of right now. I've got to get around to watching The 10, but the rest of his movies I've seen and like very much. 2008, he makes Role Models. Also a top 10 comedy for me, so David Wain's got movie. 2 in my top 10. It's so rewatchable. It's so funny. Everyone crushes it in that movie. Andrew, if I had to guess, your favorite Sean William Scott performance is The Goon. But I go Role Models for him.
Probably. I mean, Goon is tough to say because Sean William Scott's not really playing Sean William Scott. He's kind of playing a very simple character.
Sure.
He still ends up being very funny, just the way he does things. The scene where some guy is in the audience at a hockey game, or one of the players is saying like homophobic slurs, but his brother's gay. There's the scene where that's how he gets into hockey, is Sean William Scott just beats up this hockey player, and at one point he just like screams in the hockey player's face, but they slow it down and he goes, "My brother's gay!" and then headbutts the guy in his helmet. The helmet explodes and the guy falls down. So it's funny stuff like that where he just but it's not the typical performance. When Sean William Scott is being classic Sean William Scott, I suppose, Role Models is definitely the cream of the crop.
It is Wanderlust in 2012, Paul Rudd and Jennifer Aniston. A movie I like a lot. It has some great scenes. There's a story beat that I really struggle with, but overall I like the movie. 2014, They Came Together, Paul Rudd and Amy Poehler. I think a super underrated rom-com.
It's a satirical romantic comedy, is it?
Yes. The two of them like telling their story, and a lot of similarities with Hot American Summer as far as the absurd humor, surreal humor creeping its way in throughout the runtime. And then in 2018, it's his most recent film, A Futile and Stupid Gesture, which we got to discuss recently as we were talking about MacGruber and Will Forte, who stars in the movie, about the founding of the National Lampoon magazine. Definitely different tone-wise than most of the stuff he's done. Just like we said, it was different for Will Forte. But a movie I'd definitely vouch for. It's on Netflix. Check it out if you haven't. But that's it. That's his entire filmography. Very high marks for me. I think a very consistent for sure.
To be fair as well, he does a lot of television work in between all of this, so there's not a lot of film. So the film stuff is kind of
That's
a
his
little
entire
bit few and far between.
filmography, Andrew. I didn't say TVography. I'm not talking about his televisionography.
No one says TVography. No one says televisionography. My God, man, it's all listed on Wikipedia under his filmography. But no, anyway, like you said, some of these movies are just fantastic. I haven't seen all of these. I never saw Wanderlust. It didn't feel like it was up my alley, but I saw Wet on American Summer. I've seen Role Models. Role Models, I remember when it came out. Like, I don't think I saw it in theaters, and then I bought it on DVD, like a crazy person in 2008, and I watched it, and I was like, man, this was great. I was like, this is amazing. I do need to see they came together. I remember just seeing something for it, and I was like, it's just a kind of a classic kind of romantic comedy. Didn't really seem up my alley, but if there's more to it, then I might have to do that.
There's this. I'll just spoil. I guess I'll spoil one scene. They're having dinner with her parents. He's meeting her parents for the first time, and the dad just slowly through casual dialogue reveals that he's like a white supremacist, and Paul Rudd just goes, "Oh, what the fuck?" It's
I can see Paul Rudd doing that in my head, so I will add that to the list. I wonder if that's streaming anywhere. Let's find out right now while we're on show. But otherwise, David Wain, it's on Peacock. Excellent. It's also on Pluto TV, folks, and Amazon Prime Video. I have so
very easy to watch. There you go.
But I didn't realize David Wain directed Role Models. The names had not crossed in my head because Role Models, I guess by and large, is fairly straightforward as far as there's not really any kind of like, there's no satirical nature of it. There's no kind of weird like absurdist comedy necessarily. It's still very funny. And I like it a lot. But so quite the run that David Wain has had ultimately.
Andrew, let's just jump into it. Let's talk about this movie, Wet Hot American Summer. Are you ready?
Yes.
On the last day of summer camp in 1981, the campers and counselors of Camp Firewood are putting the finishing touches on another wild summer. Camp director Beth finally gains the courage to speak with the astrophysicist Henry that lives next to the campgrounds, and camp counselor Gail has a therapeutic breakthrough concerning her recent divorce. Meanwhile, Coop may finally have a chance to date Katie after her boyfriend Andy pushes her too far, and Victor thinks he can lose his virginity to Abby, but Neil needs Victor back at the river where a group of campers are in grave danger, while Susie and Ben just want to put on the best damn talent show they can, but Ben's secret relationship with McKinley is discovered by the other counselors, and they're unsure how they will be accepted, and the Vietnam veteran Gene decides to confess his impulses to the whole camp after some sage advice from a can of mixed vegetables, and everyone is oblivious to the fact that a piece of the space lab is hurtling towards the camp. When you lay it all out, Andrew, there's a lot crammed into this movie, right?
Just your very classic summer camp movie. This is a plot that's, we're all very familiar with. A lot of different ins and outs that, again, we've seen in a lot of places before. But it manages to combine them all together in an interesting way.
You can tell the movie is written by people with an improv background, sketch comedy background. Each of these stories kind of has its own beats, and if you were to cut this movie up and play each story in its completion without bouncing around, you would have like a handful of 10-minute sketches essentially. But that being said, I think they weave them together really well. They blend in together really well. Characters hop from one story to the other pretty seamlessly. I think there's some definitely impressive craft considering it's so early on in these creators' careers, and early on in everyone's career just about. I mean, this cast, absolutely stacked. One of the most stacked cast in any movie we've ever covered, but that was not the case in 2001. It just so happens that so many of these people go on to greater success after this film. There was, I would say, 2 stars going into this. 2 people with real significant public careers before this movie. And then afterwards, it's just about everyone. But we're going to get there. We're going to talk about it, talk about the scenes, but we're going to dive deeper into this cast first, as we always do, because every episode we recognize one person who goes so far above and beyond the Call of Duty that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. And we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, I think I know where you're going, but this is a tough one.
Do you?
I think I do. Should I write it down and then I can reveal? You can just trust me. You can just trust me that I'm not going to change my guess based on. And I'm just saying that
I'm supposed to use our pattern of rapport over decades of friendship to trust you.
Yes, because I can't find a pen to actually write this down. So yeah, we're going to play it this way. Andrew, who's getting your Mark Strong Award?
This is tough because there's a lot of people that are really going above and beyond, but I laugh every time this man is on screen, so I've got to go with Christopher Maloney as Cook Gene.
That was my guess. That was my guess. He specifically, I think, is striking your funny bone of all the tones and all the jokes in this movie. I think this one's good.
It's so weird because again, it's Stabler, and I always get so weirded out when I'm like, what? And
he's already Stabler. That show starts in '99. He's got a couple years under his belt as the hyper masculine detective, no nonsense detective Stabler. And most of his career is that archetype, very serious military type guy, or he's in the prison drama Oz.
Oz or NYPD Blue or Homicide: Life on the Street. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. He's got this he's this very straight laced guy that he's Stabler. Like that's what you expect from him. Even when he's in Man of Steel, alum of the show from Man of Steel,
right?
But like even there, he's just very straight laced, very just straight military man, like just playing it like he needs to be. And then he does something like this, where he's just absolutely insane and saying the weirdest stuff, and it's all so funny. And then he actually ends up showing up in the first two Harold and Kumar movies too, as these ridiculous characters as well. Like in the first one, he plays Freak Show, who's just a really deformed, strange-looking man that picks them up when their car breaks down.
I've never seen those movies. I had no idea he was in them.
And then in the second movie, he plays a Grand Wizard of the KKK. So, because of course he does. So there was this brief period of time from 01 to 01 to 06 or 07 that he was just gonna show up and do this random stuff. Who cares? It'll be funny, and he is funny. It makes me wish he did more things like this, but he does come back for, I believe, both of the sequel series, or both of the further series. But he's just so funny here. The way his character will just be he'll be he's like, it's in the pantry above the sink, right next to my bottle of dick cream. Wait, I forgot that last part. Just that. I in my head, I'm just anytime I say something followed by wait, what? Am I just riffing on this character? Is it just imprinted on my personality to this point?
And what I love about those jokes is I feel like it's a joke we've seen before. Someone says something weird under their breath, but the fact that 80 Miles is there, I think it's 80 Miles, right? It's Gary, his assistant in the kitchen. To always call him out on it, I think makes it that much funnier. It's what'd you say, Gene? And he's like, I think you said dick cream. Having someone in the movie that actually hears what we heard and calling him out on it, I think escalates that joke a little bit.
It does, 100%. Because normally it's they say something weird under their breath, and the most you get is somebody kind of being like, eh?
What was that? Nothing.
There's a brief moment, and then we move on. But for him to be like, no, I think you said this. And the joke eventually goes full circle to where they just, on display, put him when he says something weird. He just does it in front of everyone. So I'm like, yep.
I think this is a great pick because it's not only funny because Christopher Maloney is playing against type. That's part of it. But it's genuinely good. It's genuinely fun comedy. If you had no idea who this guy was, if this was your introduction to him and you didn't know about his usual roles, it would still hit. It would still land. It would still be very funny. I think maybe... I'm just trying to think of other comedic stuff. You mentioned some cameos and stuff he's done. There was that Netflix show which has a comedic slant to it where he sees the cartoon unicorn. I'm struggling to remember the name.
It wasn't on Netflix. It was on Sci-Fi. It was called Happy, and
That was
it's
on
based
Sci-Fi?
off. It was. It's probably
Okay.
on.
It's streaming somewhere. A friend of the show, my wife, watched it. I saw it occasionally. She enjoyed it, but he's not
That
as
one
wacky
is
as here. But
strange because that's actually based off a comic that Grant Morrison did. Believe it or not. And it's basically a girl has been kidnapped by a deranged man dressed as Santa Claus, and the girl's imaginary friend seeks out Christopher Maloney to find her. And the imaginary friend is the blue floating unicorn that only he can see. So that's the hook of the show, which I remember reading because that's the hook of the comic too, and I was like, what? It's like, that sounds like the most ridiculous thing ever.
I mean,
So
sure, why not? Sounds great.
Yeah, and it sounds definitely
Not the weirdest thing Grant Morrison's ever written.
Absolutely not. But I love it. It's great. But yeah, it's definitely absurd, but I wouldn't necessarily say he's like playing a comedy in the sense that like he is here. But it is definitely a little. It's more like you're taking Stabler and dropping him into like a much more fantasy tinged world. Which, don't get me wrong, it works and it's good, but it's definitely. I definitely do recommend it as well. I think the show's pretty fun.
Andrew, for my Mark Strong award, it's tough. This is one of those cases where like about half this cast, if someone told me that was their Mark Strong pick, I would say, sure, I get that. Yeah, they're hilarious. It's like, everyone gets their bits and their routines, and whichever ones like really click with you, that's probably your Mark Strong award winner. I think I have to go with my heart here, which is going to be Michael Showalter as Coop. There's truly no leads in this movie. This character is close to being the lead. I think his story has the most like heart and genuine kind of, most of his movies are send up of these camp movies, but his story flirts with like being a genuine story from one of these movies a lot. I've just got to go with him because he's, I don't know. I guess, like I said, it's my heart. And the fact that he can land some of the more genuine, actual, charismatic, romantic scenes, but also be wacky, also slip on a banana peel and kick a silver bucket onto his head, and also say some of the absurd dialogue like I quoted at the top of this episode. And probably part of it is just knowing that he's part of the creative team behind the movie and is the writer. I can't really separate that. I think he is pulling things together. He's a bit like the glue, because like you said, he touches on so many. God, this movie has so many different tones and swings, and I think he's got a finger in all of them. And for that reason, I'm going with him as my Mark Strong Award winner.
I think that's a good pick. I guess he's kind of the everyman of the movie. He's meant to, obviously, you get more time with him than a lot of other characters. You're meant to kind of sort of empathize with him as like the lead character, the guy who kind of wants
classic underdog, has a chance with the popular girl.
Yeah, and just, it makes sense. But he's doing a great performance here. Obviously, like you said, he's a co-writer on this movie, a co-writer and director of a great many films of his own. I didn't realize this at all, that there are movies I have seen that he's directed that I didn't even realize he directed. Stuff like The Big Sick, or The Eyes of Tammy Faye, or that he has a Christmas movie coming out soon starring Michelle Pfeiffer. Like, how did I not know that was a thing?
What fun. Michelle Pfeiffer, Chloe Grace Moretz. Okay.
Dominic Sessa, who was in
Jason Schwartzman.
The Holdovers. Dennis Leary. Michael Showalter out there doing a whole bunch of stuff. Still occasionally works with David Wain as well. Just has co-writing credits on several of his further efforts as well, beyond the Wet Hot American Summer franchise as it's somehow become. But out there doing a lot of stuff. But here, I think he's definitely kind of the emotional center of the film, as it were. He gets his arc. He gets to do his kind of ridiculous, very stereotypical summer camp type thing that they, of course, take to absurd heights. But he does a great job of it, and I think he's a good center for this movie.
Andrew, if I had to guess, if you questioned 100 people who've seen this movie, who their Mark Strong Award winner was, the majority of them would say, what does that mean? What's a Mark Strong Award? He's not even in this movie. And then after you explain to them, there's this podcast called Best of the Rest, and that's the term they use for the MVP of the movie, they would go, oh. And the winner, or the majority pick, would probably be Paul Rudd as Andy. And I think that's in large part because he's absolutely hilarious in this movie and it's a great performance. Another part because we all love Paul Rudd and the stuff that he's gone on to do after this film. But it's truly fantastic. This was probably my runner-up for Mark Strong Award. He gets some of the biggest laughs out of me, and his character is the worst. He's absolutely awful in every possible way. I mean, he is responsible for children dying. He is horrible to his girlfriend.
Multiple children dying. Like
he, doesn't want to pick up after himself. And I realized I did this all in the reverse order. I started with the worst thing and got less serious. But he's just, it's so extreme that it's funny. And not everyone will be able to pull that off, but Paul Rudd certainly can. I mean, my God, like on paper, I'm gonna have to censor so much as like talk about my favorite quotes here, but he's with his girlfriend Katie, who just wants to spend time with him, just like, hey, can we go for a walk later? And he's like, God, you're smothering me. And she's like, oh, I just thought it's the last day of camp. And he just goes, fuck you, dick. And walks off, and it's just the most horrible extreme thing you could say. But
so needlessly antagonistic, so like needlessly escalating, like just weird.
It's so funny though. I love it, and it's pretty. I say this is like classic Paul Rudd, but he's normally not mean. He's normally like much more likable than this, but this is somehow still likable in a way, even though it's the most awful thing. It's just so extreme that it circles back around to being hilarious. And I really mean it. Not everyone could pull off that tightrope walk, but of course, Paul Rudd can.
Of course he can. Is he one of the people you would consider? I mean, he wasn't really a star by this point.
No, he's not one of the two I was thinking of, but he had, he did the Halloween, which does not make him a star. Clueless, which is like
it's
6
odd to
years
me
before this.
Clueless and Halloween 6 are the same year.
95?
95, yeah. And It's so weird to me because Clueless technically comes out first, and then it's Halloween 6, and I'm like, man, what a weird 1-2 punch of a debut. One where you're the likable former stepbrother, and then the other one where you're the grown-up version of a child from a 1978 horror classic. But yeah, you watch even the closest Anchorman's probably another one where his character's not particularly likable.
Sure.
But otherwise, yeah, and especially as you like leave this, even stuff like 40-Year-Old Virgin, there's still like a charisma to the character that like works. And then like you get into stuff like Role Models, you get into I Love You Man, you get into stuff like that, and that's kind of when he really takes off and becomes like Paul Rudd. But I'm curious, like, is it like Anchorman? Is it that era? Like Anchorman, 40-Year-Old Virgin? Is that what turns Paul Rudd into like a star?
Honestly, I don't know. I was trying. Yeah, probably. I mean, Ant-Man probably takes him to like another level, but he was a well-known comedic.
He was well-known
commodity before that.
Yeah.
But because he is probably a tier below, like in the public zeitgeist pop culture world, like a tier below, like Tom Hanks and Keanu Reeves. Those are people that like everyone loves, right? Paul Rudd's on his way there. There's probably still a few holdouts that are like, I don't know, he doesn't really work for me. But like, everyone likes this guy. But I don't know if there's that one role that really solidifies it. It's like all the, oh my God, what's his name? 40-Year-Old Virgin and
Steve
This
Carell.
Is 40. No, the producer of those movies, Judd Apatow. God bless. I think it's his work
of those too.
in all of those Judd Apatow universe films, where he ascends, but he's not starring in most of them. Like Forgetting Sarah Marshall. I mean, he's like maybe the Mark Strong Award in that movie, a Mark Strong Award winner. I don't know. I'd have to think on that one, but like he's not in it a lot. He's a supporting character, but man, he steals the scenes that he's in. And I think it's those type of roles that just accumulate to a greater star power.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I you get it's no one thing for Paul Rudd. It's a culmination of his life's work that endeared him to the public eye, and it's what we all want for ourselves. But yeah, anyway, here as a deeply, deeply unlikable character, he is still very funny, like you said. Like the line with, I think he's making out with Elizabeth Banks, and he's like, tastes like a burger. I don't like you anymore. Like just, and also like it's just that playing on that, like the idea that like obviously one, he's just horned up, but just the idea of like the idea that things just shift so quickly at summer camp. Like you're into something one instant, you're gone the next. This dude literally just goes on and on about ridiculous nonsense, and it's perfect. He does it great.
There's this great outtake on the Blu-ray for Role Models where, again, it's Paul Rudd and Elizabeth Banks, and they are separated for most of the movie, but spoiler alert, they reunite in the end, and they have this big kiss. But there's an outtake where they kiss each other, and then he goes, "You taste like a burger." And she goes, "I don't like you anymore." And they just walk off in opposite directions. It's pretty fun.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Great callback.
No, one of the like I said, established A-listers or just big names that I would say going into this movie is Janeane Garofalo as Beth. She has a pretty successful decade in the 90s, whether it's more bit parts like Romy Michelle's High School Reunion or The Cable Guy, or more substantial parts and like, critic favorites like Reality Bites, The Truth About Cats and Dogs. I mean, she's got a pretty healthy career in the 90s. People know who she is. Alum of the show from Mystery Men. I think my Mark Strong Award winner, but there's no way for us to check. But she's a known name. She is, the like alternative girl of the 90s. At least for me, that's how I always saw her. I thought she was just cool as hell. And I think she has more success before this movie. Well, that's not fair. She's had plenty of success after, so I'm not trying to turn this suddenly into a backhanded thing. I just think she goes into this movie as probably the most well-known, or one of the two most well-known, and she is hilarious as always. She absolutely crushes it. She's mostly gets to play it straight the most. She has a sweet budding romance with the astrophysicist next door, but she does get one scene where she gets to just let loose and scream as they look for the phone. I'm sure we'll get to it in scenes, but yeah. I love that she gets to do that. Man, she's so funny. There's a scene where she's like calling out kids. They're about to be picked up. I don't even remember why she's got to call them out, but she's like, "Listen for your name," and she starts listing off names that clearly at some point she just starts
making up
and just spitting syllables together. Isla Goldberstein, sure, and just like stalling. She's really good at those deliveries. She's very funny. I think even like the hierarchy of this camp is interesting because she's, like I said, one of the most well-known. She's the director. She's got these up-and-coming comedians as her camp counselors. It's sort of like a real-world passing of the torch is maybe too extreme, but, shepherding in some new talent by a known veteran.
Yeah. I was actually looking at her filmography. It's kind of insane in the late 90s because in 96, she's in 3 movies. In 97, she's in 5 movies, including Copland, which I don't know if we've talked about Copland. Guys, watch Copland.
It's so good. I think we find excuses to talk about. Anytime Sylvester Stallone comes up, friend of the show, Adel Rafai, whenever he was on, somehow it came up. He's like, "Yeah, you guys seen Copland?" Or like, "Oh yeah, we love Copland. We stand Copland on this podcast. Don't worry."
Yeah, Copland is Copland is an achievement, and I'm pretty sure I've said it before. If only for making Sylvester Stallone look so
schlubby,
dumpy and schlubby, like just making him look so like pathetic, for lack of a better word. Like, and he says that like he put on like 40 pounds, and he did it by just eating a lot of pancakes every day. And I was like, man, what a life, what a job.
It's for work.
It is. He probably had like 47 of them every time. Because anyway, Then she's in 5 movies. So she's in 5 movies in 97. Copland, also Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion. She's in 6 movies in 1998, including Clay Pigeons. She does a voice in the English dub of Kiki's Delivery Service. She's in Half Bakes, which is only a short scene. A lot of these are actually like Romeo and Michelle. She's a fairly minor character. Cable Guy, obviously, she's in like a scene, I think. So 98, you get 6 movies. In 99, she is in 8 movies. It is nuts. One of which is Mystery Men, where she does have a sizable part. One of which is Dogma, where she has a very unsizable part. So it is an interesting mix of things. And then, so 99 is kind of like the peak year where she's in the most places. And then 2000, she's still in 6 movies. And then it tapers off a little bit. Although then again, in 03, she's in 7 movies. And so one of them is a short film. But like, she's all over the place. And then this ignores that, like, throughout the 90s and the 2000s, she has been on television a very, very long time, with a lot of appearances, a lot of different things, a few instances where she became like a lead character, others where she would just do cameos or whatever. It is a very long career, but Janine Garofalo is great, and she is great here. She, like I said, she's largely playing it kind of pretty normal, but then there's just these scenes where she gets to just unleash, and you're kind of reminded that, oh yes, that is Janine Garofalo. The scene you're talking about, the one where they go into town, the montage there, yes. That's another one where she gets kind of do some ridiculous nonsense. But otherwise, it's fantastic. She does a great job, and the movie is better for it.
I love how you read interviews with her and stuff, and she's just very open and honest about her career, about her status, and like where she falls in the Hollywood landscape, and what it's like to be a woman, now an older woman working in this business and stuff. And you mentioned all those movies in 99 she was in. There's one more film that she was almost in. She was set to play the part of Marla Singer in Fight Club, which I can totally see. Talk about cool alternative chick. That makes a lot of sense. And that would have certainly been a huge boon to her career, just like it ended up being for Helena Bonham Carter. But according to her, she was a done deal with David Fincher, and it's Edward Norton who spoke up, said she couldn't do it. And she accuses Edward Norton of wanting Courtney Love because they were romantically involved at the time. He wanted to put his girlfriend in the role. Brad Pitt stops that, and they just start over and cast Helena Bonham Carter. That is Janine Garofalo's story. Edward Norton denies that he had anything to do with her not getting the part, but it is commonly accepted that, yes, she was up for that role. She was the number 1 spot. Something happened, and she loses it at the last minute. She's also been upfront about, I don't know if it's for this role specifically, but she's trying to break into the next level in Hollywood. She's told by producers, well, yeah, lose the weight, lose this amount of weight and the part's yours. She loses the weight, still doesn't get the part. I think at one point she was just like, all right, screw it, and just is totally open in interviews about the stuff she goes through, which probably, honestly, cost her some parts, but I just have that much more respect for her for being able to open up about these things.
I agree, because there is a lot of it happens to women a lot in film. It's funny because there's the movie Knocked Up. I think there's a very interesting, not interesting, but there's a sequence of events that are played for laughs, but it's when Katherine Heigl is pregnant and she's talking to like her boss at the news station, and they're like, so just remember that after the child is born, you're gonna have to, yeah, and she's like, what? And they're like, we're just gonna need things to tighten, like they're avoiding just saying you need to lose weight after the child's born, and so like they're literally like, just tighten. So he keeps using the word tighten and just keeps like, just tighten everything up. And she's like, and they're like, it's like, oh, me lose? Like, no, we can't tell, we can't, the woman in the room is literally like, we can't legally tell you that you need to lose, like, can't tell you that. But like, it's one of those scenes that like clearly is being used for the absurdity of it, but also it's a little too true sometimes too, where they, this kind of pressure is put on them. It's like, oh, well, if you want this, you have to look like this, you have to do this, and then they do that, and then they just don't use them anyway. And so I like Jeanine Garofalo a lot. I think she's very, very funny. She went to my high school. I've mentioned that before, I'm sure. Graduated from James E. Taylor High School, which I did as well.
Where's
Katy,
that at?
Texas. Katy,
Katy.
Texas.
Okay.
If you exit West Green, right before Mason Road, it's right down there to the left. But Garofalo has said she disliked life in Houston because of the heat and the humidity. And folks,
okay.
where's the lie?
If you're not a fan of heat and or humidity, yeah, Houston's not the place for you. Hey, I get it.
Is anyone actually a fan of them, though?
Andrew, I will only accept criticism of Houston weather from people who are from here. So I accept it from Jeanine Garofalo. I accept it from you. And that's all I got to say about that.
All right. Anyway, long story short, Jeanine Garofalo is great. She's great here.
And perhaps appropriately, the other, I would say, established name going into this film, it's going to be her love interest, David Hyde Pierce, as Professor Henry Newman. He lives next to the campgrounds. They seem to have had an attraction for a long time, but they finally start talking on the last day of summer camp. And this thing happened where I was researching, getting ready for this podcast, and I see that's David Hyde Pierce. It's like, oh, I know that name. I click on it. I'm like, oh, duh. He's the guy from Frasier. Like, it was a huge show in the 90s. I never watched it, but I know of it. I've seen scenes from it just through osmosis or whatever. And I feel like I never knew that, but I also think I might just realize that every time I watch this movie. Because I don't know if it's the mustache or what, but he doesn't look like that character and certainly is not acting like his character from Frasier. I think he's really showing some comedic chops here. I think he is so damn funny as this professor, or associate professor, which is less than, which is very hard for him to accept. Very funny. I don't know. I love his performance. Again, I'll tell you about it. It's very funny.
It's very funny. And I mean, he's very funny in Frasier too, but like you said, it's a very different type of performance. In Frasier, he's extremely dry. It's all like just quips and wit playing off of Kelsey Grammer's Frasier, and he is fantastic in that show. Like, it's like if somebody told me their favorite character on Frasier is Niles, I wouldn't at all question that, because he is part of what makes that show work and why you were able to kind of take Frasier out of Cheers and put him into his own world. The only reason that works is because he's got this great supporting cast. I have not watched the Frasier reboot, although those I have seen that have seen it have enjoyed it. But David Hyde Pierce is not on it, so why would I care? But anyway, he's great here. Obviously, he's playing this like weird, shy, insecure character. There's obviously a little bit more going on there, but it's funny. Like I said, he kind of screams at Jeanine Garofalo originally because she wants him to talk to the kids. He doesn't want to do that, but then he bonds with all of these. I love the scene where he walks into the cafeteria and he's like, "Where were the and he kind of struggles to find the term. And he goes,
sci-fi kids.
And then he finally goes, "Where are the inside kids?" And they're like, "Oh, over there." And he's like, yes. And I just, so funny. Just great delivery, great presence, everything.
And then we have Molly Shannon as camp counselor Gail. And I don't know, maybe it was unfair of me to say there's only two. I guess she is also pretty well established by this point. She's been on SNL since 1995. Because of that, she's got the bit part in A Night at the Roxbury, making her an alum of the show. She's in How the Grinch Stole Christmas at the same year, so double alum of the show, I guess you could say. You know, some bit parts throughout the late 90s. So it's building to this. Was she a household name at the time? Yeah, I guess maybe probably. Superstar, I think, was out the year before. So definitely well known. And definitely, I think you can see the seams a little bit in this movie. Like, her scenes seem to involve no other major cast members throughout the film until maybe like a one scene at the very end. I get the feeling she was shot all in just a couple of days. Not alongside the other cast. I mean, it all blends and edits together in very well, but it just kind of goes to show that she might have had a busier schedule, perhaps being on SNL at the time, that she wasn't able to be there for the entire shoot. But It's great. I mean, she's basically got one bit that plays out throughout the whole movie. It's that she recently had a divorce. She is clearly struggling to accept it. She breaks down in front of the children, and one child in particular sort of becomes her therapist, gives her very sage advice. He's clearly wise beyond his years, and helps her through this emotional moment in her life. It totally feels like it could be a sketch on SNL.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the idea that, you know, the kid ultimately has to save the adult. Yeah, it is interesting. I didn't even think about it because when you're watching it, there's so much going on and there's so much rapid fire stuff happening that, like, it never really dawned on me that she doesn't interact with the rest of the cast, because why wouldn't she? Like, the events of the camp are still happening, like, mixed in through everything. So, you know, you're cutting back and forth, but it's happening in such a way that I never noticed. And then you pointed it out, and I was like, oh, geez. It's still funny. Like you said, she's playing off of the she's got plenty of stuff. I think she even had a bit run on Will and Grace as well, which would have been right before this. So I think she was definitely a known commodity. Is she like a selling point or a star? I don't know about that. She is a superstar, but it is nothing, Chris. Jesus. Nothing. Absolutely.
I'll go back and I'll slide that over.
Whatever. But anyway, it is funny. I don't remember. Do they do anything? I know she has like the one kid that she gets needlessly attached to. I don't remember if they do anything else with that or not. I hope not. But it's other way. Anyway, she's playing the role exactly as it needs to be.
They're planning their wedding at the end of the movie. Is that what you're talking about?
They are. Yes, that's right. So yeah, definitely, totally fine. Not at all concerning. But yeah, it is. It's great. She does a great job with it.
Yet another alum of the show, Marguerite Moreau, plays Katie. This is the pretty girl, the girl next door type that Coop has his eye on. She's with Andy, Paul Rudd's character, who's a jerk. So Coop gets a swing in there as the nice guy who gets the girl in the end, or so he thinks. And it's very funny. She's mostly playing it straightforward, like I said, girl next door, just super sweet. Clearly has feelings for Coop, and then gets to really subvert the trope at the end of the movie, which I feel like she probably had a lot of fun delivering those lines. It's a very good payoff to this whole storyline. But like I said, I love the show because she's back on Mighty Ducks. She's the girl on the team back in that first movie. And
there are several girls on that team in the first movie, Chris.
Is there?
There are at least.
Well, she's
two.
Connie. There's more than one girl? There's two?
Because they recruit that kid and his sister. Yeah. And then in the second and the third, you have the goalie that comes in too. But in the first one, there are at least two girls on that team. Because we're an inclusive team, the Mighty Ducks.
And apparently she's in Queen of the Damned. So she's a double alum of the show. Look at that.
Double alum of the show. I do not remember her character. I'm sorry. But
you don't remember Jessie? You don't remember Jessie in Queen of the Damned, Andrew?
I don't.
I don't. Yeah, I don't remember either.
I don't either. Anyway, yeah, she's largely she's doing exactly what she needs to do here. Playing off Volley's character, she gets to deliver that monologue at the end, and is basically the object of Coop's affections. Again, another kind of classic summer camp trope that they take to the most absurd level possible.
Andrew, I don't know if we're going through every single cast member. There's so many of them. They're all so funny, and like I said, they all become big names. I just feel like we got to touch on most of them. But like, how about Amy Poehler, who plays Susie? She is the producer. Excuse me. She's the director and choreographer of the talent show. So she is obviously taking it super serious. She's very exacting, very demanding on her talent as she trains them up. Takes the role very seriously. She's very uptight. I think she's absolutely hilarious. I think this is like a fully formed Amy Poehler at this time. Is she already on SNL in 2001?
I believe so.
2001. Same year she joins SNL in 2001. So
oh wow,
this is like
that's so weird to think
really
about.
The beginning of her career. I think she's like I said, so damn funny. Like already fully formed Amy Poehler this early on. I love this, and I guess we got to talk about Bradley Cooper at the same time, who is the producer. They're together in most of their scenes, and this is the film debut of Bradley Cooper. Talk about someone who goes on to do bigger and better things. Alum of the show. We talked about him on A-Team, of course. You know, Guardians and Limitless, and he's Bradley Cooper. You know who he is. But the two of them together as a duo make a great team.
Yeah, their relationship is interesting because like you assume they're together, but they're not, and the movie eventually reveals that it's much different than you may expect. But they're both doing a great job here. Like I said, Amy Poehler kind of out the gate here. Like his Parks and Rec is until like 2009, so that's several years, and that's after she's on SNL. So her whole SNL career is like to come here. Obviously, the Weekend Update, all of that hasn't happened yet, and it's so weird to think about like. Because like you watch it now and like you obviously know everything Amy Poehler is from now, and it's so strange to come back and be like, oh wait, yeah, this is before that, and it's great. And Bradley Cooper obviously probably, I mean, is he the most famous of everybody that was in this movie now?
Bradley Cooper, Paul Rudd. I think it's a moot point. They're both A-list.
They're both
celebrities.
pretty
I don't know.
now.
It's
yeah.
Paul Rudd or well,
I mean, Bradley
Amy Poehler's
Cooper,
pretty big too, Andrew. I don't know. There's some really big names in this movie.
There are
Bradley
a few,
Cooper, Paul Rudd, Amy Poehler. Those are probably the three biggest now.
Did he get any awards for A Star Is Born? I don't remember. But anyway, Bradley Cooper
he also
obviously even now getting
directed
into
that,
so he did the movie on Bernstein that got nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards. So he's out there.
Awards.
Well, I'm like
two of these people are in the MCU,
including Bradley Cooper.
Yes, that's one of the two. Yes.
Yes, and he's in more. Is he in more Marvel movies than Paul Rudd is? That's the question.
They're probably both about 5. They both have
he's
3
got
movies
all 3
with
Guardians,
their own. And Paul Rudd
then
is all 3
Rockets.
Ant-Mans. They're both in Infinity War and Endgame.
No, I think
Paul
Paul
Rudd's
Rudd-
not in Infinity War, but he is in.
He's not in Infinity
Civil
War. He's
War.
in Endgame, but he's also in Civil War. Whereas Rocket is in all 3 Guardians, Infinity War and Endgame. He's in Love and Thunder, and that's it.
So 6 versus 5, or
Versus
6 and
Paul
6.
Rudd being in all 3 versions
6
of
and
the
5.
Ant-Man's, Endgame, Civil War. Was Paul Rudd just the 5? What's the 6th?
No, yeah, I think it's just 5.
All right, Bradley Cooper wins. Bradley Cooper's the bigger star. Got it.
He's the bigger. That ends it.
the math checks out. Yeah, I mean they're both great. So not much more to say about it. Both 2 relatively small parts, but a lot of people in this movie have small parts. But like I said, this cast is immense. We could go on forever. I do have one other shout out I want to make though, if you don't mind.
I have one shout out as well. I'm
Go ahead, after you.
curious if they're the same. I want to shout out H. John Benjamin as
No, mine
the
is not H.
voice
John Benjamin.
of a can of mixed vegetables. Talk about absurd, surrealist humor. This is insane that we have a voice of mixed vegetables, and it's insane that you have one of the most prolific voice actors of our modern era of recent television. I don't know what you want to call it. And again, they're getting someone before they really hit big. I mean, I first knew this man's lovely voice probably as Coach McGurk from Home Movies, a show I love dearly, but certainly isn't a huge hit. His biggest roles are still to come in Bob's Burgers, and Archer, and a million other things. Like, it's truly an iconic voice, but they tapped into that very early in 2001, casting him as a can of mixed vegetables. I love this performance. His voice is just innately funny to me. And Griffin Newman on the Blank Check podcast years back did some fan casting when we found out Fantastic Four is going to enter the MCU. And he said that, the Thing is basically a voice role. And he suggested H. John Benjamin as the Thing. And I was like, God, I'm going to be mad because I know they're not going to do that. But I would love to see that. Of course, the casting is out. I'm sure this guy's going to be great. But what we could have had, Andrew.
There's bound to be an animated Fantastic Four project that this man can do.
Sure.
But yeah, it's obviously Archer and Bob's Burgers are the two things that most people would definitely associate him with now. But I mean, you look at his filmography, you've got Venture Brothers, you've got, like you said, you've got home movies, you've got Aqua Teen Hunger Force, you've got, and then like weird like live action stuff mixed in, where like he just will briefly show up on an episode of something like Rescue Me or Parks and Rec or whatever, just appears. Just these like random, these minor bit part things, and it is but this is way at the beginning. He does oddly also come back for the sequels, also in live action for some of it, as you find out the origin story of this can of vegetables, which I don't think anybody asked for, but of course at that point, why wouldn't you?
Sure. Andrew, who did you want to shout out in the cast before we start talking about scenes?
I actually wanted to shout out Ken Marino, who is playing Victor. He's the guy that abandons the kids on the river with Jolo Trulio and runs back to camp because he thinks he has a chance to lose his virginity to Abby. But I didn't realize that Ken Marino is also a writer and director, and he's also a co-writer on Role Models. And he's actually a co-writer on several of David Wain's projects. And I had no idea. I've seen him in a whole bunch of things. He's that guy, shows up everywhere. He's also shows up as bit parts in Role Models and Wanderlust, and They Came Together. I remember him from episodes of shows I like Happy Endings. He's all over the place. Was also a writer on that show Children's Hospital for a long time. Played several characters on that as well. But I like the weird like 80s ending that him and Jolo Trulio have after they save the kids, where they both just laugh and the music starts playing, and it would have freeze framed,
yeah,
but it doesn't freeze frame. But both of them are just being funny. But his whole like desperate run back to camp just to find out that Abby doesn't even remember who he is, I was like, oh no, you poor man. But yeah,
I'm glad you're shouting out Ken Marino because he is hilarious. I think underrated. He kind of goes under the radar. He's in so many great comedies that we've all seen and love, and he's usually a little bit more of a bit part, or he gets like the thankless role, like, you know, he's the stepdad in Role Models. It's very, very funny, but you know, not like a role that's set up to steal the movie or anything, but he's very good at what he does. 2013, he's in a movie called Bad Milo that I've heard great things about. I'm almost certain I own it digitally. It's on my watch list. I gotta check it out because just looking at the poster, it just looks absurd. What? It's just him cuddling this little, very ugly looking.
It looks like a Funko Pop of the baby from the show Dinosaurs.
He has a polyp that turns into a 2-foot tall sentient being. That's what it is. So yeah, check this out.
A Funko Pop of the baby from Dinosaurs. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, that's actually extremely good. I want everyone to visualize that in their head, and then look up this poster and see how accurate Andrew is.
And the cast for this movie is quite stacked. Ken Marino, Gillian Jacobs, Stephen Root, Peter Stormare, Patrick Warburton, Kumail Nanjiani. Man.
Andrew, let's talk about this movie. Let's talk about the scenes of the film. And of course, we're going to start by talking about the best scene of the movie, or at least our personal favorite. So Andrew, kick us off here. When is this movie firing on all cylinders? And what is your favorite scene in Wet Hot American Summer?
This is a tough question because pretty much the whole movie feels like an insane fever dream at times.
Yes.
And it's tough to kind of narrow it down to one, but I've mentioned two scenes. One's like a montage that happens when they go into town. The other one I think is what I have to go with though. And it's when Jolo Trulio and Janine Garofalo are just like rampaging through the camp trying to find Ken Marino because Jolo Trulio gets back. What's his character's name? I keep saying it. Neil. When Neil gets back to the camp after he abandons them, he runs back in and he like bursts, like he just appears on this motorcycle. There's a gag throughout this movie that they use immensely where they don't bother trying to hide the stunt doubles.
Yes,
they do it all the time, and they do it in the sequel show too. But so this guy drives up on a motorcycle that's clearly not Neil's.
Very bad wig.
Yeah. Very bad wig. And then like the minute it cuts out and cuts back, and he's getting off the motorcycle, now it's the actual actor. And he's basically goes to Janine Garofalo. He's like, the kids are stuck on the river, and they don't know where Ken Marino's character is, who is Victor. and they just rampage through this camp. Like they like answer the phone, and it's Ken Marino, and there's some guy in there like tracing the call for some reason, has like the reels and everything on there, and he's like, he's gone. It's like, it's long enough. The call came from inside the camp, and they lose their minds. They basically start rampaging through the camp. They're like, there's only one other phone. It's in the infirmary. They burst in the infirmary where the nurse is with somebody, but they like knock all the stuff off her desk. They're ripping stuff off the walls. They're just tearing this place apart. Trying to find the phone, which is literally in the next room, and they can't stop just rampaging through and tearing everything apart as they walk 20 feet and get into the room to find out that the phone is off the hook and he's left. And they had just, even on their way back out, Neil breaks more stuff as he's leaving, even after they find out that he's gone. Like, he like breaks a phone lamp and everything. Like, he throws a jar of candy at the wall and everything, and it is just fantastic. It is very funny. It's the most manic energy that Janine Garofalo gets to put forward, and I think actually Neil Jolo Trulio is also just extremely funny in this scene with the way he's just casually ripping things apart and breaking it all down. I thought it was great.
It's so good, and it's what I was alluding to earlier, talking about Janine Garofalo, a scene where she could really let loose. I mean, when they storm into the infirmary, and the nurse is like, "What are you doing?" And she goes, the phone, where's the fucking phone?" That line delivery is so good. And I think it's the first F-bomb. They save it, and they drop like 3 at the end of this movie. But it's so good. But by this point of the movie, you know if you're in or out, right? And if you're like on board for the silliness and absurdness, you just along for the ride as they kick it up a notch with this ridiculous, goofy, over the top scene. And it's the end of the Neil Victor storyline, which I love because it makes zero sense. Neil and Victor that morning have to drive kids out to the river so they can raft through the river. They're not coming back till the next day because this river is like hours away from camp. They drive all the way out there. Takes them most of the day. And then Victor is going to take the van and go back and come back in the morning. And Neil literally says, you can't make it to camp and back by the morning. It's like, this is far away. So Neil gets into the river with the kids, and the kids are like, we need Victor. He's like, oh, you're right. He hops out, steals the motorcycle, chases him.
Leaves them on the river.
Leaves them by themselves. Victor and Neil don't make it till back to camp until that night, like late at night. And suddenly Neil's like, the kids are stuck at the river, which, how would he even know that? And the kids are just stuck in one spot. And then he finally gets Victor. He's like, you got to save the kids. And then they can instantly be back at the river. It makes no sense with all the information that we have. And then Victor saves the kids off camera. We just see a shot of Neil watching Victor save the kids.
Yeah.
It's very much like Ernest having a fight with a badger that we never see. He's going, oh, wow. Oh, man, he's the best. He did it. And then Victor just walks in the frame having done it. And then the line that you talked about, Victor says, next time you drive the van, which isn't even a clever punchline to anything that we've seen, but they both laugh hysterically. Cheesy music plays. It's, you're just ready for that like freeze frame end of an 80s movie. Oh, it's so fun, Andrew. This is a great pick. I mean, hysterically running through the campgrounds. Very funny. Again, just like the Mark Strong Award, there's just about any scene someone could pick, and I would be like, yeah, that could be the funniest scene, best scene in the movie. I get it. What I'm going to go with, though, is what I feel like might be your runner-up, because you mentioned it. It's whenever they go into town. This comes about, not quite the halfway, I think. I didn't time it, but I think we're getting deeper into the movie. And for me, this is, I don't know the term, breaking point sounds bad, but it's like the movie, I've mentioned already, the slow descent into absurdity and surrealism. This is the first time it goes full tilt. This is when I'll be watching it with friends for the first time, and they start to go, wait, what is this movie? What's happening? Beth wants to go into town to go to the library to read about astrophysics so she can impress Henry. And unbeknownst to her, Henry also wants to go into town to read up about camp counseling. So Beth is going into town. A lot of the camp counselors want to go to town too, so they all hop in their truck bed. And we get this montage, music playing, happy music playing of them having fun in town. Some of the activities that we see them do. Get the upbeat music. We see Janine Garofalo at the library reading about astrophysics. And on the other side is the camp directing section, which we all know exists in the library. You've got Henry reading about that. You've got the kids getting some fast food, playfully putting French fries in their mouth. And then they're smoking cigarettes, right? They're hanging out on the sidewalk, being little delinquents. And then they get some beer. Coop comes out of a gas station with a six-pack behind his back. He was able to buy beer even though he's underage. And then we see them smoking pot. There's a clear escalation here. And then Coop and Katie go down a dark alley and talk to a shady-looking guy and get some hard drugs. And then we see them all in a cheap motel, strung out. JJ
on all different
gives
drugs.
Coop some heroin. There's cocaine happening. Beth has a crack pipe and she's twitching. The happy music is still playing. And then the montage ends with them just driving back into camp. And we get the big punchline from JJ, the character of JJ, played by Zach Orth, who says, "It's always fun to get away from camp, even just for an hour." And you realize this whole
All of that happened in
descent
an hour.
into drug addiction. They also mug an old lady. I forgot to say that. Beth like punches her in the stomach and steals her purse. It is so funny. And a scene, I've seen this movie a million times, but it took me a few viewings to see this last little bit that is, it's just some of the absurdity. They hop out of her truck bed and run off. And they don't quite run off screen. They run up to a side of a barn and stand with their forehead against the door, and they all just line up on this barn. Just why? I don't know. No,
Why?
it's just it's barely in the frame. Attention isn't called to it. I'm guessing they thought of it on set and thought it'd be funny, and they were right. It's very funny, Andrew. But if there's any moment where you're like, I need to jump off this movie, or this is hitting, I want to see where it goes, it's this one. This is when like it starts really revealing the true nature of this movie. This movie's greatest accomplishment, in my opinion, is the pacing, a slow descent. This is when it really starts to go there, so that's why I'm picking it as my favorite scene.
Yeah, this is definitely where if you're kind of passively watching this movie, this is the moment where it, like you're like, wait, whoa, what? Like it's the moment where like
Yeah.
it jumps off the rails. To this point, like you said, the movie is largely playing it straight. Like it's obviously there's a little bit of absurdity and there's a little bit of nonsense, but like it's all like kind of sight gags at this point. Like it's not like literally full on devolved into hard drug use during their
Yes.
excursion into town, which is just ridiculous. But yeah, at this moment, all bets are off, and who knows where the movie is going. But yeah,
There's some, I don't know. I'm trying to think. I'm thinking of like all the scenes before. Probably the most absurd thing that happened before this is Bobby drowns. Paul Rudd's character is supposed to be watching the kids swim using the body system, and one kid goes under. Bubbles come up. He's like, "Oh no!" And he takes his swimming buddy in his van, drives him off the campground, and throws him out the car. So we're getting there with the wild jokes, but we are still like working within the rules of film, whereas that trip to town that's supposed to take place in an hour, that doesn't. They start breaking established film rules, and that's why I think it's really kicking it up a notch. But before this, it kind of feels just like a send up of the classic '80s summer camp trope, which we've been talking about all month. And how appropriate is it that the last movie we're covering takes place entirely on the last day of summer camp? I would like to say we planned that, Andrew, but we both know that didn't happen. There are some more subtle jokes. The first time Beth goes over to talk to Henry, this is very early in the movie. They're just being really awkward. They walk up, Henry's doing some gardening, and he just goes, "Oh, here," and he hands her like a little spade you'd use to dig up weeds?
No, she
For no
holds
reason?
out her hand to shake his hand, and he hands her the spade. Yeah,
Yes, they just
he
it's
doesn't
a
just
very
randomly
awkward.
hand it to her. Yeah,
That would be ridiculous, Andrew. Excuse me.
that would be as ridiculous as a talking can of mixed vegetables. So
But she has it, and she just casually tosses it to the side, and it barely makes it out of frame. It hits the ground and just barely goes off frame. But as soon as it goes off frame, you hear pottery breaking. Like, it's very quiet. You hear shattering. And then, like, during the same scene, I can't remember the second thing that gets tossed, but
so no, what you can't even
I'm
remember
not-
it, man. It's ridiculous. She like waves the spade, and the top flies off out of screen. And that's when it
what it
lands.
is. Look,
across.
I'm
So
recounting the jokes wrong. You're
so
right.
she
Okay.
she hands him back the handle, and then that's what he throws and causes it to shatter.
There it
again.
is. I knew they threw two things. Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
spade part and then the handle. Both times pottery breaks. And then whatever the very next scene in the kitchen, something falls in the kitchen and the same exact sound effect plays of pottery breaking. And it makes whenever Victor is saving the kids, you hear the pottery breaking. Like, they work that in as much as they can. And I laugh every time. And it's one of those things where, like, especially those early scenes, you might not even clock it. It's so subtle. But once, like, you tune into it, you're like, okay, there's signs that this movie might get more absurd than it appears at first.
Yes, that is definitely like when you have the you're definitely getting the hints, the cracks or whatever you want to call it are starting to appear. And yeah, I laughed so hard. And then there's like a Wilhelm scream not long after that
Yeah.
towards the kitchen
During
scene where they're
Capture
just
the
like
Flag.
Yeah,
When
I
someone
think-
falls, there's a Wilhelm
hear
scream. I
that?
think maybe during the rescue there's one. So that's another sound
Yeah.
effect that
they
pops
keep
up a lot.
using it. But the glass shattering, because like you said, it's like the gingerest throw to the side. There's nothing in the direction she throws it, but it still
Yes.
makes the pottery sound. And then he clearly throws it down right next to him, and it still makes a pottery smashing noise. And I was like, I don't know why it's funny, but it is, and I laughed every time.
One thing that's remarkable about this movie is that there are still scenes that I think would play perfectly in a straightforward 80s version of this. Like, you can't really parody something if you can't play it genuinely. So I think scenes like this are so key. Like, the nerdy kid's getting picked on. He's really into D&D. He asked the girls if any of them would like to join him for D&D. And they said, in your dreams, douchebag. He says, douchebags are a hygienic product. I take that as a compliment. And it's the kind of interaction you would see in a traditional teen comedy like this with the jocks and the nerds and the way they'd interact. There's a spot where Paul Rudd and or Andy and JJ are on the pier. And JJ just stands up and walks to the edge and just face plants like into the water. Which it just seems like teens being dumb. Like, again, it just feels more like genuine. And then, like, the opening credits, I want to mention this too. Like, you know, one of the influences of this movie is movie like Dazed and Confused, which is like a specific period in time, sort of, you know, real life type stuff and very nostalgic feeling. The opening credits of all these kids around the campfire playing guitar, drinking, having fun. There's loud music playing, and then there's like these freeze frames every time like a name comes up. It feels like Dazed and Confused. It feels, again, genuine and played serious. Like, up to that point, you could expect a straightforward or genuine summer camp movie to play afterwards. There's nothing in those opening credits that even feel like comedy. They're just doing the real thing really well, which is so important for the later absurd stuff that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. You covered it pretty well. I don't have nothing really to
thanks.
add. Nailed it. First try.
There's, I have this theory, Andrew, that I thought of maybe 30 minutes ago, or whatever. How long we've been recording? 5 hours? I thought of it 6 hours ago.
Yep.
Thinking about this movie, and every time I watch a comedy that's over, say, 10 years old, I'm always mentally preparing myself or scanning it. I'm like, yeah, there's probably some stuff that doesn't age well. I would argue comedies age more poorly than any other genre. And that doesn't mean they all age bad, doesn't mean they should be canceled, you couldn't make them anymore. I don't want to get too extreme about this. But in general, compared to other genres, comedy, there's often jokes that just don't stand the test of time because they're a product of their time. And I think one reason is because just, part of comedy is pushing boundaries or subverting expectations. What I'm setting up here is there is a subplot involving gay characters, but I think it's hilarious. I still think it's hilarious. I don't think there's really anything wrong with it, other than, we'd want to cast actual gay actors when we can to play gay parts. But they do drop the F slur a few times, but it's all in service of subverting the expectation. What we're supposed to think is, well, this takes place in the 80s. They're going to pick on their friend when they find out he's gay or cast him out. One of the punchlines, I guess, is that McKinley sneaks away and he meets up with Bradley Cooper's character. And his friends are talking about him. They're like, oh, why'd he leave? The girls are getting undressed. We got to hook him up with somebody. And as they're talking about it, we get this genuinely sensual gay sex scene in the film. And it's a joke. Like, this is supposed to be funny. And so this is where you kind of see some age, because, like, again, don't take this as a call to like cancel the movie or anything, but like in general, just a character ends up being gay and we see them have sex. Like, that's not really a joke. That's not in 2024. You can't really put that in a scene. But this is 2001. Like, this is pushing boundaries, or at the very least subverting expectations. You expect to see some boobs in a movie like this. You don't expect to see. Again, I want to reiterate, sensual homosexual sex. Like, the joke is that, like, this is the opposite of what you would expect in this movie. To me, the joke isn't at the expense of homosexuality, and this is the point where I say I'm not, like, the judge on this, so by all means, if someone has a different walk of life and they feel differently about it, feel free to message me and get me up to speed. But these are my thoughts. So while, if there's anything in this movie that ages roughly, it's this. But I don't think it's really necessarily that it's wrong. I think it's just that we've moved beyond these boundaries so much. This doesn't feel extreme or feel like it'd be a joke anymore. But I still think it's funny. But if there's...
It is funny, and the scene still manages to be kind of funny, because like towards the end they start like almost climbing up the wall. Like, they're showing just their feet, and like the one guy like braces himself on the wall, and the other guy like just keeps like climbing up the wall, and you're like, where are you going? But yeah, like it's obviously meant to subvert the expectation, like, but obviously like they're talking about how they need to get him with a girl, they need to hook him up with somebody, and literally while they're having that discussion, we're cutting back to this sensual homosexual sex scene. And then it to me, the actual like full punchline comes later at the final dinner, and obviously like JJ and Gary like open the doors to the mess hall or whatever it is, and they're like Ben and McKinley. They're like, we have something for you, and like they all brace because they think it's gonna be like the big reveal or anything and everything, and they just pick up this giant crate and barrel box and go, it's a chaise lounge. And they like just got them got them literally a piece of furniture. And
Andrew,
again, like, it's
full circle. Of all things, in Ernest Goes to Camp, he mentions a chaise lounge. What are the odds that the last movie we cover, a chaise lounge comes into play again?
I'm guessing it's a summer camp thing. You've got a lot of chaise lounges at summer camps. But to me, that's the actual punchline, is like you see that and you're like, oh man, what are they going to do? Because it'd be such a 80s summer camp thing to be like, oh, we're going to make fun of the gay guy. We're going to, like, all that. But then instead it's, oh, we bought you a gift from Crate and Barrel. And yeah, it in wrestling terms, it got a pop out of me. Where I was like, it's
good.
Yeah.
They do have like a secret ceremony, and Beth is the officiant. She weds them, and it's generally very sweet. I mean, like I said, this movie is clearly like has nothing negative to say about homosexuality whatsoever. So I think we're good there. It's just it doesn't feel as groundbreaking as I'm sure it did in 2001, but it all still plays as far as I'm concerned. There's a scene that I think you must have loved, Andrew. For it seems right up your alley. It's whenever. Well, I just want to say, first of all, it's very smart, efficient writing to set this entirely on the last day of summer camp, because you can reference stories that you don't have to actually show. It's just like, we get the feeling that Coop's been chasing Katie for a long time, or, Beth's been liking Henry, or whatever it is. And they take advantage of that in this one key scene where Coop is getting a bunch of campers together for the last baseball game. And he's recounting what they've been through. And he talks about, we seemed like a real sorry team, and we had some really funny mishaps during those early practices, but somehow we started to come together and started to click and started to believe in each other. And so whenever the campers from that anonymously evil camp show up for this last game, we are going to probably, be down until some trick play at the very end and come back and win. And when the kid's like, that seems very trite. He's like, yeah. He's like, everyone else feel that way? And the kid's like, yeah. He's like, you want to skip it? Like, yeah. So when the evil camper shows up, he just walks over. He's like, hey, guys, actually, I think we're
they're not feeling it. They're not feeling it.
He's like, oh, you sure? And they shake hands and they drive off. So like,
no, the other coach even is like, yeah, it's a little dated, isn't it? Yeah, like the other coach is like in complete agreement that it's like a very outdated trope, but he's like, yeah, it's like, you guys just fine not doing it. Yeah, that's fine, and they all just leave. It's like they were cool with it. That was.
I mean,
great.
You've got the girl from Mighty Ducks now as like a grown up in the movie. That's how much that trope has aged.
Right,
if not longer. I mean, obviously,
Bad News Bears is 70, the 70s, and I mean, it's the idea of underdog sports movies are hardly new, but even underdog summer camp movies are not at all odd. I mean, we just talked about Heavyweights, which has this plot in it, but I love that they just were like, you know what? Should we just not do this? And then they just walk over, and I love that not just are they the other coach is literally also just like, yeah, this is a little dated. We could go without this. Like, all right, everybody. Yeah, and I was like, it's fine. They were cool with it. I was like, beautiful, perfect.
Towards the end of this movie, they are really just, like you said, no rules and are just going for it every chance they get. Henry finds out that there's some space debris heading for the camp. He's worried they may all be doomed. And, Beth and Henry are kind of like out on a romantic walk. He's clearly distracted. And she's like, what is it? You can tell me. Do you have crabs? And he goes, no. Well, yes, but that's not the point. And he's like, meet me at the picnic table in 10 seconds. And walks off screen. And she just kills 10 seconds by looking around. And then she walks slightly to the left. The camera pans, and there's the picnic table. But now it's full of all the nerdy kids and stuff. And they're lost in conversation. He's like, oh, yes, Beth, you remember I asked you to meet me here in 10 seconds? It's very good. Like, now we're like, Monty Python spoof movie type territory. Like, we've evolved or devolved to this point where literally anything goes for the sake of a joke. And it's so much fun.
Yeah, when he just delivers the line of "meet me at the picnic table in 10 seconds," I was just like, "Oh, this is where we're at now," and the movie is all the better for it. I loved it.
There's a big talent show happening during the finale, and you got things like Amy Poehler's playing the piano, but when she watches the show, she turns around, she's playing it backwards. She's clearly not actually playing the music that we hear. They jam so many jokes into this talent show, like Michael Showalter playing a dual role. The show has this MC. It's a former camper who's now like an old man. That's how it's set up. But it's very clearly Coop. It's very clearly Michael Showalter. So you're like, oh, this is his bit. This is his talent. He's the MC. But at the end of the talent show, Coop actually shows up. So you realize this is actually a separate character. Which even watching this movie back, I was like, when this starts, I'm like, oh, did I remember this wrong? I thought I remembered this being two separate characters. But now I see they never explicitly say that. But then that reveal happens, and I was surprised all over again. But Alan Shimper is that character that's emceeing the night, and I love these bits. He's telling like the worst.
Wait, you genuinely thought that Coop
jokes.
Was just playing the MC as like undercover?
Yeah, I thought that was like his talent. No, like everyone was in on the bit. Oh, that's Coop. He's doing a bit.
No.
He's being, this is his part of the talent show.
Oh no, I never saw it
I
that
think
way.
the movie wants us to think that. No, okay, well,
I don't think
maybe,
so, no.
Andrew. Maybe I'm just an idiot. But that's, I thought that for a few seconds. But I love this bit. I love it, I went to camp so long ago. Again, I guess. Jesus Christ was my camp counselor. I remember we said sticks and stones could break my bones and mean it. Just not good jokes, but everyone's laughing hysterically, it's the funniest thing.
Well, that's the whole joke of the talent show at all, is it's absurd reactions to what's happening. Yeah.
Yes. Or one that we, quote friends to this day is introduces the song Day Ba Day. And we just find ways to say day ba day.
Day by day. But this is a great example.
So good. And that's
they perform day by day, and it's a genuinely great performance. But then everybody boos afterwards, right?
Yes, yeah. And it's genuine, great costumes and great performance and great singing, great talent, and they're enjoying it while it's happening. But yeah, as soon as it ends, they all boo them mercilessly. It's subverting expectations is, you can tell David Wain loves it. That's clearly his bread and butter, and this movie does it every chance that it gets. The sort of epilogue on this movie is, it's finally the next day. Kids are getting picked up, and we're just catching up with these characters. Beth and Henry meet up, and Henry has suddenly won an award for the events he did the night before, and he tells her that, I know we've been having trouble, but when the time comes, we can adopt. And she says, no, it happened. I'm pregnant. It's the next day. But we've advanced the story seemingly months. Coop, Katie finally confesses her love to Coop the day before. But on the last day, she says, well, I've thought about it. And actually, I'm going to stay with Andy because he's hot and I'm 17 and horny. And I just want to have sex, specifically with Andy and not with you. Just undoing everything the movie built for. I think I referred to their relationship and story as the heart of the movie, and then this just rejects it all completely outright at the very end for one more joke, which I appreciate. This movie fears nothing with its comedy, and it's one of the reasons I really love it.
I agree. It makes every decision it's making is obviously on purpose, but everything works to kind of serve the story and it's telling. But it also is, like you said, it's undercutting it and taking it to places that you're never really going to guess. And I think that it is really, really fun in that regard. I love that one of the other big climaxes is this piece of space lab that's going to fall, and it's going to fall right on the rec hall. And so David Hyde Pierce and all of his group of nerds are trying to do everything they can to make it not hit the rec hall, and it culminates. They succeed, and then it lands, and it's this thing that lands, and it's the most unimpressive crash ever. You're assuming that it's going to be this big fiery blast, that this thing is going to crash into the ground, or it was going to level this whole thing, and then it just kind of lands, and it's dink. That's it. We saved the day. No explosion. There's no.
And did they really do anything? Because all they did was roll a 20-sided die, and the device they make really doesn't make any sense. But who cares at this point? But still, through all of this, there's during this final moment, all the nerds have a moment where they're all laying in the grass, with all their heads, in a circle, and they have this genuinely really sweet moment where they're you guys are my best friends. Well, you're my only friends. And this summer was horrible until the last 24 hours. And I'll never forget this. Zero jokes, just genuine emotion from here. And they wrap up their story. And I'm this, I as I'm wrapping up my thoughts here, I can only tell I'm going to have trouble, because what I love about this movie is its absurd swings in tone, and it's willing to do anything for a joke, as long as the end result is a laugh from the audience. But as we said many times in the podcast, is talk about what a director's role is, what a good movie is. An even tone is part of it. Like, a good movie has a consistent tone. You can be wacky, but as long as it makes sense in the world that you built. But this movie builds a world and consistently destroys that world for a joke, which on paper sounds like a mess and that would be horrible, but I love it. It's something I have to maybe just not think so hard about, because I just give myself over to this movie and I love it. I think in a lot of ways it's, maybe it sounds dramatic to say ahead of its time, but they have those Netflix shows that are 15 years later that had the same absurdist style and they get rave reviews, whereas critics at the time weren't getting this. So, like, maybe the world wasn't ready for it at the time, or honestly, I don't know. I don't know what it is that suddenly these things start clicking years later, but I love this movie.
Yeah, agreed. It is very, very funny. Yeah, it's ahead of its time feels weird, but it's one of those things that I think, there was a bunch of stuff in like the late 90s, early 2000s that felt like it kind of came and went, and our generation especially kind of latched onto them a little bit later as we got older and discovered them. And that's we've talked about home video and things like that being what leads people to doing that. And that's just so hard for something to do now. And it makes it feel like it's kind of a definitely a thing that, like, there's not anything that I think is being like, you think about things that are getting late stage follow-ups, like even stuff like Twister or American Summer or Arrested Development or whatever it is. There's very few things I feel like come out now, or even within like the last 10 years, that are going to be getting late stage follow-ups. Like, everything coming out now is based off nostalgia for an older thing, and in that rush for nostalgia, there's nothing new being created that we'll have nostalgia for in 10 years, basically. Not to be a grumpy old man or do the whole, they don't make anything good or original these days. They do. I make lots of stuff that I love, but like, nothing gets a chance to become a cult classic now in the way modern distribution really works. Like, it kind of gets its, something like Fall Guy. I loved Fall Guy. It was on digital like 2 weeks after it came out in theaters because it didn't do well. So now it's out there, and they eventually released a Blu-ray and all that, but there's no, I hesitate to think there's ever going to be a movement for something like Fall Guy to, in 10 years, they're going to be like, you know what, we should give another shot to Fall Guy. I can't think of a television show that years from now we're going to be like, you know what, we should do a follow-up to that. What you're getting now is Frasier, Return of Frasier, or Return of Will and Grace. And not to say that these things also can't be good or can't be entertaining, but this is kind of it ends up being like a weird time capsule in a way of a different time that we didn't appreciate when we had.
Well, Andrew, it's the end of August. It's the end of summer camp month. It's the end of summer. Kids are back in school. It's time to move on. We're moving on to a whole new month, which means a whole new category of episodes. Coming up in the month of September, our category, what we've chosen to do to ourselves, is only cover films with a 0% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. 0%. And these aren't direct-to-DVD movies that no one's heard of that has 2 reviews. These are... We've picked out some movies with some production value, with theatrical releases, which still don't manage to get a single critic recommending the film. Andrew, is this what our podcast has been leading to all along?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, ultimately, it's. I don't think we've ever accidentally done one of the movies on this list. So this is a particular list, and I don't think we've ever gotten to 0% before. But we're here now.
We're here now. It kicks off next week with Wagons East, the John Candy Western from the 90s that I have a personal connection to. I genuinely like this movie and find it funny, but I'm going to throw the caveat here that I have not seen it in some time. I don't think this is going to be a problem, though. But, Andrew, any early thoughts, early impressions on Wagons East? Is something you've seen before?
it's John Candy, Richard Lewis, John C. McGinley. I'm sorry. I will always love watching this movie. Like, even if it's not, whatever. John Candy is one of my favorites. I tried to get you to do a whole John Candy month that didn't survive past the discussion phase. But I love John Candy. I also love Richard Lewis. I know I've talked about him recently-ish. I don't remember why I talked about Richard Lewis.
Maybe because he passed away. We mentioned him.
Passed away. I don't remember what brought him up for some reason. I know he was on. I may have mentioned Curb Your Enthusiasm, but because he was on that again as a fictionalized version of essentially himself. But he is also very, very funny. Most people would probably know him as Prince John from Robin Hood Men in Tights, but I think he's super, super funny. And he is... So when you put John Candy and Richard Lewis into a movie together, I'm probably going to have a good time no matter what. So I'm actually not at all dreading watching Wagons East whatsoever. And then, the rest of the month, I may not... We'll see about the rest of the month.
Yeah, we'll see. If you want to know the complete lineup, hop into our Discord server, hang out with the community. There's a link right there in our show notes. The thing that you never look at, even though you listen to podcasts all the time, they're always asking you to. I get it. I don't really do it either, but I'm pleading with you now. I'm asking you now. Look at the show notes there. There's some cool stuff in there, like a link again to our Discord server. Come and join us, join the conversation, see what the whole lineup is, and you can let us know your positive thoughts on any of the movies that we have that we're covering. There is a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes Wikipedia page if you want to see the full list of films that we had to cull through to pick the 4 that we're going to cover. Maybe there's some other movies that you would prefer that we cover, or some other movies you have some positive thoughts on. We want to hear all about it, and you can let us know, once again, in the Discord. Andrew, we'll be back next week. And until then, just remember, maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy. And check our show notes for his SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That's the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.